So you know I'm deaf, right? This is my good ear.
Okay.
I'm deaf in this ear.
We do like this.
Yeah.
And we live. Welcome, Paul. Welcome to the booth. Thank you for coming on the show. For whoever is listening today, this is day 2 of Appsec Phoenix and Black Hat. We have the good host, Paul Harrington, on the booth today to chat a little bit about leadership. Paul, before we kick off the fireside chat, and we have nice warm fire in this very cold day, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell a little bit more about you.
Sure. So I lead information security and cyber defense across a global portfolio run by an American private equity company called KKR.
Right.
I've been at the firm for about 9 months, so I'm relatively new to the position. Before that, I was a partner at EY, and I've led several kind of security leadership positions in consulting over 20 years, 20 plus years, I think.
How did you find the transition from traditional EY consultancy, traditional into the other side of the table?
I mean, I consider myself a bit of a hybrid. I've always been a technical engineer throughout the beginning part of my career, and then I wanted to start making some serious money. So, what's the point otherwise? And got into investments and private equity from there. So I think in order to succeed in that level,
right,
and then that world, you need to be a hybrid of businessman and security engineer. So not a traditional path. There's nothing really in university that teaches you both ways. So it's very much an on-the-job learning experience. But it's been good to me. I've been very lucky, I think, in my appointments. Right time, right place is half the battle, and just a good network. And I think that's often the reason for good positioning in new jobs.
Fantastic. And in leadership position, I mean, you interact with a lot of company all the time, especially new company coming into market. What have you seen in terms of transition, new generation versus old generation? How they are different in terms of leadership, in terms of security leadership, especially.
So this is a question I get asked a lot. So just for transparency for the audience, I kind of sit on around 175 boards. I don't actually participate in the board, but I advise them on security initiatives. And often we think of kind of having a board representation from a security perspective is all about bringing awareness to the board and kind of raising capital for new initiatives and helping security teams. But a lot of the time I'm sitting there explaining to the boards and answering questions around, is the security practice efficient? Is the CISO a good CISO? Are they fit for purpose for our operating model? And because half the time they don't fit the boardroom. And that's an interesting shift in what we're seeing, because as time goes on and technology moves on, we're seeing Generation X leaders, I'm going to say plus 35, maybe plus 40, who are traditionally mainframe network security led engineers, retire, move on, or move on to pastures new. And then the new wave of security leadership, which quite frankly, the youth aspire to, being software driven and being Gen Z, right? So SD-WAN, kind of infrastructure as code, is the new way businesses work.
Right.
Maybe not the large conglomerates of the world, but the startups and the fast moving businesses are all youthful and straight out of university graduates. They want to work at exciting businesses, and no one's working on iSeries anymore. Let's be real. AS400s if they're still on your network, you need to sort that out. But everyone's using Ansible, Terraform, in a way to create an elastic environment. But protecting that environment is super difficult. Right. So how do you get a leader who understands risk as a priority versus speed as a priority?
Right.
And boards are sitting around going, I don't understand my true risk. I'm getting information from all different sources saying lock down the perimeter. It's traditional basic risk advice, which is vanilla, right? Unfortunately, it's vanilla, right? And we're having to re-educate boards to say, look, your business is shifting to a new paradigm. It's evolving rapidly, and you need to consider new age leadership when it comes to security. So how do you teach youthful, hoodie wearing, I mean, look, it's so stereotypical, but hoodie-wearing, against the world kind of figureheads, which typically some of the best leaders are that, to get them to be boardroom ready.
Right. And do you think it's a convergence between, the new leadership into being board ready and the opposite to be new boards or existing board to be new leadership style ready? Or it's just security need to talk risk, need to talk quantification, and that's about it?
So risk quantification is another subject, and quite a big one. Okay. But to answer the first part of your question, I think it's an education platform for boards to understand that they've got to evolve.
Right.
If you look at businesses that do incredibly well, incredibly fast, they are pretty much running new technology, new initiatives, tend to be software driven,
Right.
and understanding that risk profile for the business is a huge factor for boards, because it's the reputation of the business which hits the EBITDA model, right? Which is how you evaluate company worth and value, and that's what boardroom and boards and investors care about. So reputational damage, all those kind of things need to be put into a mixing pot and spat out against an appetite which needs to be offset against what the new age leader says, which is quite difficult to sometimes comprehend. Like, for example, stress testing code dynamically, I think we all agree, is a pretty valuable thing, right? Boards just haven't got a clue, right? Traditional boards, should I say, right? So
why should I spend the money in doing that exercise when I can spend money maybe marketing, go to market? It's I think right now we're seeing the shift between spending a little bit more relaxed and questioning every single penny that organizations are spending. And in my opinion, I've seen the role of the CISO to be much more justifying and protecting certain activity, also the engineering community. And they need to do that at board level, because that's what the money spent is being decided. So how do we enable Gen Z to talk risk and quantification versus I have problems that looks good to solve versus I actually need this problem because it's going to reduce the organizational risk, the organizational exposure, or it's give us more chance to actually do business in other areas.
Yeah. I think that we need to transform traditional frameworks to actually understand quantifiable intrinsic risk, not just this is a security foundational practice that we need to follow. So what would the impact of, say, not having full control of your network or full identity of your network as an intrinsic risk metrics? That's quite a difficult thing, because it's not something you can just put out there and expect every company to easily achieve. It's all got to be kind of qualified against your own operating model and your geographical span. But I think that the message we need to give boards to educate them a bit better is, what does a non-negligent position look like, right? Because for my companies that I kind of oversee, I know that security will never be fully, complete. Right? It's an ongoing transition. I don't ever want to use the term best in class, because that's subjective. No one really knows what that means. What does good look like? That's again another term that no one really can define. But instead, think of it in a case of, what do I need to do to prove, if an event were to occur, to turn around to the board and say, look, we're not negligent. We cover X, Y, Z as best we can. We're firefighters. That doesn't mean, we have a great fire brigade in the UK. It doesn't mean that we stop all the fires from starting. Fires will start, and we just need to be best prepared to put them out. And if you can be in that prepared state, and a state that you can be comfortable with, you can qualify your risk acceptance criteria to your board in a way to say, look, we recognize that we've got some gaps, but from a position of comfort, I can sleep tonight, because we're not negligent. We're covering the basics. We're strength. The defense in depth is a concept of continual progress, right? So we need to consider not just application security, but all the security domains. I mean, they're all valid, right? But I would say, as we move into 2023 and beyond, the application surface is becoming more and more prevalent, because we're expecting more and more from our from our selling tools.
Everything is becoming software, everything is becoming faster. So doing risk assessment and quantification on a piece of paper, on a sheet, on a model, on a Excel spreadsheet. Sorry for my shiver.
No, look,
it's not anymore the day.
I mean, look, traditionally, in my Appsec days, I would have focused on two things to gain access. It would have been, I would have targeted a specific user, and I would have then, once penetrated a user, I would have looked for vulnerable operating systems in the network and tried to laterally move that way, right? To abuse the trust mechanism within AD. Nowadays,
well,
it's still valid, and I get
a minor thing.
But now that that used to be my main priority to protect that. But now I look at the attack surface and I think, crikey, we've got some pretty sophisticated web apps going on.
Yeah.
It's all internet exposed. It's completely testable from the outside with no real protection against.
Right.
So, like Appsec Phoenix, like it worked. I'm trying, but like bug bounties and kind of dynamic testing in the just secrets management, like all those kind of things are so important in today's world.
And it's impossible.
How far does the budget go? I mean, like you've got to prioritize.
No, exactly. It's focus nowadays, and it's if you look at individual problems, you get completely lost in a sea of problems because right now we have, I think the technology stack that have changed in the last 2-3 years, the speed of change have dramatically increased, and now we have security team from the traditional world and maybe some of the new world that need to look at 400 different alerts and are completely lost.
Yeah.
And trying to solve a new problem with old methods doesn't really work, right?
My advice to boardrooms, if any boardrooms are listening, is to try and get some kind of youthful perspectives into the boardroom, try and innovate the boardroom, and try and. So the reason why I bring that up is because often a boardroom will only look at value creation propositions.
Right.
So they will look at trying to grow their values based on a load of calculations. Whilst I see security maybe not as a value creation proposition, because it's not. Well, it is a preservation proposition.
Exactly.
Okay, so it depends how you want to view it. But I've been involved in a lot of sell-side activity, and no one's ever come to me and said, this business is amazing, I'm buying it for their security posture. But what I have seen is when you have a negligent security posture, I've seen the EBITDA model drop because investors want to understand that you have all the bases covered and not big, programs awaiting their investment to fix a hole. The investment is there to scale growth, right, and not fix problems. So, but half the time they do, right? So,
I mean, a lot of the time you're selling a business, you actually have to assess where you are, and you have to fix problem. But if the problem are too big, it might scare off your buyer, your investor.
I mean, it probably doesn't scare them off, but it definitely makes the process more competitive from their standpoint.
Right.
Because they have negotiation tactics. A bit like when you're buying a house. You buy a house and you see it's got crummy windows, you're going to want the windows replaced before you buy it, right?
Or a lower price.
Or you bake that into the calculation. Right. Yeah. So having a youthful perspective on the board actually gives a really varied proposition because it considers the Gen Z profile.
And on that subject, that's a really great subject. Would you advise maybe getting some net, non-executive advice or cybersecurity net from the youth perspective to help them on both sides getting board ready, but also helping the board getting a new perspective?
Yeah, and I think NEDs are fantastic for that. Ideally, you would be invested because then you're accountable for your own money. But and you'll be surprised how people think when their own money's at stake. But no, if you can gain
free, but then when your money's at stake.
No, I know, I appreciate it. Look, for me, the right answer is yes. Okay, if you can, the more perspectives you can get, the more informed you're going to be. And if you run a traditionally mature board, who are focused purely on raising capital and and giving good dividends to their shareholders, I think that youthful perspective is very, very important, especially from the security community. It shouldn't just be from the security community. It should be tech enabled. because that's where we're driving our businesses.
But we're security people, and
I know, I fully appreciate it.
security
So
people, so.
for this audience, yes, if you can offer your services, like it's a great way to break into leadership, to prove to new roles that you would be going for, to say that you've held NED positions, like it's a really strong offering, I think personally. So yeah, if you can get onto one, definitely try for it.
How would you, as a young leader, how would you get involved, for example, in a board or a network that has that kind of level? Because it's not easy to get,
Yeah, and it's getting tougher because as security gets into a wider subject matter,
Right.
the domains are becoming more sparse and more segregated from each other. Like you very rarely see a file in application security engineering in today's world, but back when I was learning, it was all your job. Yeah, it was all your job. So, I mean, I consider myself a jack of all trades, master of none, and that's probably led me to being able to advise across the entire domain of information security and cyber defense. For the new age, it's going to be tougher, unfortunately, because in order to get into good jobs, you have to specialize now. You very rarely come out of a university, first time, second time job and understand everything. And that's going to be more of a challenge. But I think if you've got the availability in kind of doing some pro bono, charity-based, advisory board work, well then jump on that, because that experience goes a long way. And for someone who recruits an awful lot of CISOs, and I say that because I've recruited over 10 in the last year, all for different jobs, not for the same role. I really value that experience.
That would have made a really bad.
Yeah, I know. It happens, I'm sure. But no. I mean, that experience will go an awful long way.
Brilliant. Paul, in order to conclude the conversation, for new leaders, what will be the top 3 advice to get ready for the new century, for the new kind of evolution, and then maybe one advice for the board to actually get ready for the new generation?
Yeah, so once you've established yourself in a business, you will probably specialize. Maybe you're a SOC analyst, maybe you're an Appsec engineer. Start to think about how business risk is really impacted by what you do, because inevitably security professionals are there just to create a safe environment for business operations to effectively run. And it's the profiteering and the revenue that actually business leaders really like the sound of. Whilst they probably are very happy that you've crushed a load of alerts, like it's not making money, right? Like it goes back to that preservation value. So if you can be a true enabler in a business, and get that visibility within your teams as you go up and down, up the food chain within an organization, get more exposure to the board, because the board are the ones inevitably who are driving the business, making the key decisions. And for me, that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in as many top seats as I could be, directing, rather than just firefighting all the time. So I guess my advice is to try and learn how businesses work alongside your day job, which I know is incredibly difficult in this rapidly evolving. The terminology is very, very important. So alongside, I mean, if you're a true enthusiast into business, I know people like to take multiple degrees whilst running alongside their security jobs. Do a business degree.
But there is also the cyber executive and non-executive advisor board, the net from the financial.
But you're not going to be accepted unless you can provide valued calculations on risk qualification, right? So that comes with experience. Like I don't think you can learn that out of a textbook.
No.
Don't rush it. Like it will happen. Like I know everyone wants to get to the top seat really, really fast.
You don't want to get burned in that process.
Well, the tenureship of CISOs in today's world is not good, right? So, and whilst the market's incredibly lucrative, you can jump out of one into another. You don't want to get a bad rep for being turned over quite a lot, right? So, and advice for boards is get educated, right? And that's a tough message to deliver.
Yeah.
And it really is. And it's a tough education piece for them. Why should they care?
Well,
So
if the security people talk risk, it's kind of, I always say, meet in the middle.
yeah,
Security people talk more risk and quantification to get more reputable to a board, and the board needs to understand, well, if I need to get into the weeds of,
Yeah.
okay, maybe how we solve this risk versus these other risks, maybe getting a little bit aware about cloud security, application security, at least the category, the broad category, so at least you can have an opinion. Yeah, maybe this year we invest in a program on application security. Maybe in a year we invest in a cloud security program and we reduce our exposure of this level.
I mean, one thing I'd like to leave on. Now you've just said that, it's kind of opened my mind into something new. If you do get the opportunity to get to that level and present at the board, go prepared, right? Go prepared for the so what, because you're going to probably present. We've got this threat. We need some money. The board are going to turn around and say, "That's great, but what does it mean if it goes wrong? How do I know you're doing a good job? How are you going to measure success?"
Right.
So those measurements are paramount, right, in determining that you're doing a good job, which gives them confidence that they've invested well in you.
And if you panic or if you don't know the answer,
don't panic.
And it's valid, I think.
Just simply say, "I don't know the answer to that right now, but it'll be my job to come back to you today on that."
And it builds trust. I think
the
message for the board is building trust on two ways, because if you scare a board, then you lose trust, confidence, and a job very quickly.
It's the one crowd you don't want to displease, right? So let's just, it's career limiting if it goes wrong. So go prepared is the right answer.
Brilliant.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much. If
Pleasure.
people want to listen more of what you say, conference, so where they can find you, where they can follow you.
I mean, typically, I've reduced my overall kind of social presence because of what I do. I think it was sensible to do that. I tend to speak at a lot of private equity events now, so maybe not so much back in kind of like the Arsenal days, back when I was a coder. But I mean, I mean, you can add me on LinkedIn for sure, and I will definitely give you my point of view on there. I don't have a Twitter profile anymore, just because it's too dangerous. Because an opinion can go the wrong way on Twitter. So.
Your opinion involves shares and share price.
It does involve share price. So, I mean, I write a fair amount of white papers. So, just Google private equity, cyber. I'm sure something will come up.
Cool.
Thanks for having me. Cheers. Appreciate it.
Thanks
for the coffee.
All right, all right, all right. Welcome back to the show. We are back to back today. We move from a very high level board meeting into much more deep technical. It is my bread and butter, application security and cloud security. Andrew, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on the very nice fireside chat. Hopefully, it's not. Be careful, it might be too cold, too hot. Sorry, I had to make the joke. But Andrew, tell us a little bit more about you. How did you get into your role right now? What are you doing right now? And how did you get into what you do today?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Andy Pannell. I'm the application security lead at a company called Get. So we are a taxi app based in Israel and the UK. I've been working in security for about 12 years now. So I kind of started as a pen tester. I started attending OWASP events and seeing Appsec kind of growing more and more of a job rather than kind of on the side. And I found that when I was pen testing, I would find the same problems over and over again.
Right.
And I wanted to kind of fix some of that stuff and actually, it's a bit of a cliche, but shift left and fix things before they got to production and try and fix and be defensive and be more proactive in terms of security. So involved in OWASP, I'm an OWASP chapter leader, and now I've been doing Appsec for maybe last 4 or 5 years now.
Right, and we talked with Sam yesterday about OWASP London. Which chapter do you lead?
I lead the Newcastle chapter in the northeast of England.
Brilliant. And how you see the attendance in OWASP have changed your kind of perspective on security? Have it helped, improved? I'm a big supporter of OWASP, big passionate about it. So I always like to shout out.
Yeah, so I've led the chapter for about 5 years now, and when we started, it was very focused on pen testing on the offensive side of OWASP.
Right.
And there was maybe 15 to 20, typical pen testers, very socially awkward, and I said that as an ex-pen tester. Whereas now we are collecting maybe 100 people,
right.
Across the mix of decision makers, technical people, more Appsec people. So Appsec in the last 4 or 5 years has massively grown. I think it's an industry, and we're seeing more focus on Appsec becoming more of a professionality. And so I think that there is more focus on Appsec. And when the pen tester rolls a report, we need someone to kind of sit between the developers and to almost translate what that pen test means in terms of product security.
Right, and I think that's quite important to actually move and transition from security and application security. It's not just pen testing. There is much more fun in actually finding the problem, and it's much more difficult to actually go there and helping an organization to fix, convince them that that's important. It takes a massive amount of skill. So not if you're a pen tester, consider a transition in purple team because it's a good exercise of, I found the hole, but then how you fix it is a whole nature and it can open up a whole nature.
Yeah, and I found that especially when I started moving toward Appsec, my mentality as pen testers, why don't you just fix this,
Right.
Like this is simple, just patch this piece of software, it's a third-party dependency, just bump the version. And then you speak to developers and like, well, I've only got a limited amount of time, I've got a limited amount of story points, and actually, it looks like this one service needs bumping, but when I bump that one thing, that one service is, microservices now, it's going to affect 100 different services, which I need to have integration, units, acceptance testing. So you kind of appreciate how difficult it is when you move from pen testing to Appsec, have to fix things. It's much more of a challenge than I think a lot of pen testers, if you've not had that development role, realize.
Yeah, and I think back in the days when it was just pure patching, and even in just patching, you still need to do unit testing and stress testing. Maybe we don't see that side of the testing because we get already the patch, already tested and deployed. Appsec is a little bit more challenging because you need to go through that life cycle. It's a change, like any other change. And if you haven't been on the other side, you can't really understand or perceive that challenge.
And I think like IT security and app security are quite different. So in IT security and an end user, you update their Windows machine and find they may not be able to use it for an hour.
Right.
It's not the end of the world, right? But if you're talking about a high availability app that 99 and 5 nines, like if that service is down for an hour, people are going to be asking why that service is down, and pointing the finger towards why is security patching this. It's not been tested. It's causing financial loss to the company because orders can't go through or customers can't be serviced. I think that mentality is very, very different. I think that's where Appsec kind of comes into its own, and it's a lot about having conversations with people. There's a very much human element of it.
Yeah, and I think it's quite a transition. I think we've seen more job in Appsec and people getting much more involved. Um, there's been a debate recently on LinkedIn on is a role of an Appsec or a role of security just technical? What do you think?
I don't think so. I think that the benefit that I bring, and I think a lot of Appsec and a lot of security people are now bringing, is security used to be siloed. It used to be under IT, and they work alone. They do updates or whatever. Whereas now, I think it's a lot about collaboration across teams. So you've got DevOps, you've got Dev Infra, you've got the developers and engineers building the actual software itself, and then you've got kind of security sat somewhere in the middle, translating technical requirements to product managers to understand why they need to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
When you're building, again, shift left, but when you're building functionality, make sure you're including security in that process. You're thinking about what you're doing and becoming more involved. So like Appsec is almost like a translation piece between the tight security requirements and the product. And again, security is always that balance, but I think Appsec is doing quite well at kind of meeting those balances.
Yeah, and I think it's all about, as you rightfully said, it's creating that balance. It's translating a technical message. It's pure, okay, go fix stuff into, okay, maybe let's balance, maybe let's dedicate 5 story point or 2 story point a sprint to actually fix stuff. Maybe something will fit those story point, maybe something not. But it's treating team, I believe, with their responsibility and like adults.
Yes.
Like you give a problem and you let them decide how to do it rather than stuff it down their throat, please fix stuff.
Yeah, and security, and especially Appsec, has become more of a guidance role rather than an enforcement role. So when you tell people not to do something, like they quickly overcome it and realize there's workarounds. Whereas when you kind of guardrail them and hold their hand a little bit more and engage with like developers, I think they appreciate it, respect you a little bit more, but then come forward more often. They actively speak to you. I think maybe 50% of my time is spent in meetings, talking to architects, developers, engineers about what's the best way of doing this. And then they remember that design pattern or anti-pattern, depending on what we're building. And then in future, they don't come back with that same question. So I like the idea of security champions, where we're kind of engaging more developers to be security aware, do more security things. And I think like having these conversations with people makes a huge difference.
No, it's brilliant. And in your days, you moved from pen testing to Appsec to now building Appsec program. How would you give suggestion to other Appsec people that want to move in their role to actually build application security at scale? What are the steps that you will suggest, and to which degree also to shoot?
So I think it depends, but inevitably you're not going to have the resources of like the developers. Have maybe one Appsec person per 20 to 100 developers. Mm-hmm. So you need to think about some automation around how you detect those security vulnerabilities and how you manage those in terms of prioritizing some of that work. You can't fix everything all the time, a lot of the time. So you need to be able to understand what should I fix, what should I maybe risk accept or delay, quantify some of that risk around why we're doing what we're doing, and understand how things fit together as well. In terms of growing Appsec, that kind of security champions program, if you can't hire dedicated application security people, works quite well. Is in you kind of evangelize security. You get other people to evangelize it for you, and then you kind of present it upwards. So I talk to my CISO on a regular, once a week to kind of explain what's the posture of the application security, what we're focusing on this week, or this month, or this quarter. So a lot of engagement, a lot of talking, and a lot of automated tooling to try and I'm only one person. I can only dedicate so much time. So the more we can automate some of this stuff, the better for me.
So it's about automation, but it's also about trust and relationship. You can't replace the human.
Yeah.
It's always about, I don't know, I talk about application security people as salesmen.
Yeah.
We have to sell the idea to the various team on, instead of moving into please, can you patch and upgrade this, is building that emotional intelligence, building that rapport with every product manager, project manager, and then agreeing on a methodology that is going to be different from everybody. So that's why it's a challenging role, but agreeing on measuring KPI that are the same stuff that they report on Outlook.
Yeah, and if you're just giving someone a Jira ticket, there's no rapport there. There's no incentive to fix things. Maybe there's a fixed timeline, fine, but you're not actively engaging people and caring about security, and that's where like this, this active conversations and explaining why people should care, explaining the story points, and I think that makes developers become more proactive and helps Appsec do our job better. Yeah.
Right. And if it's, as an Appsec, we traditionally get frustrated because things don't move along.
Yeah.
And sometimes questioning, is this really important for the developer? Do they even have the story point to actually dedicate on looking at this? And sometimes they don't. If it's not important for their boss, line manager or product owner, it's never going to be important for them. So
Yeah.
I think from an Appsec program, I really like where you're going. That it's stringing along the KPI and making the matrix that the product owner care about.
Yes.
Really important for everybody. Maybe a mandate from the board, and the board level can dictate. Okay, from now on, security is one of the priority of the
Yes.
product team, and we need to do at least a little bit every time or every month. And that message, a simple message, I think, will be very powerful.
And I've worked in companies where absolutely pace is really important of delivering features, delivering products. So they're deploying to the back end, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 times a day.
Right.
And I think it's really difficult as an Appsec person to become involved in that. You can't pen test every single little feature change, right? You can't do one big pen test at the end of the year and be comfortable with that fast pace. So I think being involved as an Appsec person with the development team, making sure they have in their heads, when I'm designing X, Y, and Z, I need to think about security, given those patterns, given the architect's patterns, and then having a monthly engagement or however you plan those story points is super important to keep the business moving, but to keep it secure as well.
And I really like the point that you brought up. There are a lot of changes, and some team actually do 100 releases per day.
Yeah.
And not all of them, maybe they're just a flick of a comma or a word in a UI. Maybe not all of them are actually worth to take a look at. But there are some things that it's worth to look at. And if you build a relationship with the dev team, they actually bring it to you.
Yes.
Not the full lot, but just the one that actually you really care about. And that's the development champion program then.
Yeah, I think that them being proactive and caring about security means that I don't have to review every code request because I don't need to, because otherwise that's all I would be doing all day. But secondly, I provide guidance. So if you're changing authorization, authentication, if you're dealing with customer data, you should probably involve me or just let me read over, what the changes you're making just on a high level, so that do I need to read this code? Do we need to run more automation around security? I think that's super important. That otherwise you become stretched so thin that you offer little value, you get burned out, and I think that's a real problem.
I think burnout is a really, really common trait and problem. I've faced it myself. I've seen my team actually burning out over time, and if you don't approach this with skill and automation and with mindful that you can get overwhelmed with a minute of time by saying, I'm the security person, all your problem now is yours.
Yeah.
If you don't build that expectation, you quickly remove trust on yourself and burn out very quickly, because all of a sudden you get taken over.
And you get that alert fatigue, right? So you're running 20 tools, everything's telling you everything's on fire. Where do you start? How do you prioritize that? I think that's sometimes overwhelming when people come to Appsec, and especially as I've seen a lot of developers move into security, and they the first thing they find, I don't know, is they do a Google search, they find some credentials on a bucket somewhere, and they're like, this is on fire, this is on fire. It's well, actually, this is a developer key which doesn't allow access to production, so actually we should rotate that key, but it's not as bad as a production key leak. So context is massively important to everything we identify, everything we find, all of the tools we run.
Right, context is king. Looking at the business context, both the deployment context, is absolutely key. It's one of our favorite topic here.
Yeah.
But I think it's difficult to look at organization overall unless you have a very ingrained Appsec person. And even in that case, it's difficult to look at a report or look at 50 reports of 200 pages each and say, okay, maybe we look at that particular line because.
Yeah, and especially when you're looking at what are a load of low risk vulnerabilities. Individually, they may not be important, right? But what an attacker will do is chain those together, and that thing that provides a little bit of a story around actually some of these. As an industry, we always focus on the critical and high risk vulnerabilities, and they are important. But what an attacker may do is chain a few things together, which we historically may not patch. So I think again, context around some of these vulnerabilities, some of these findings, it's hugely important. And being able to like negotiate stuff down where like stuff isn't connected to the internet, so or you need access to a box already, so maybe that critical isn't as critical, but also the other way around where loads of loads can be chained together, maybe that's a little bit more important, we need to fix those.
Yeah, and I think as security professional, we always get bogged down by reading report and get burned out and don't have even the mental space to actually look at, okay, this and this actually can be chained together.
Yeah.
And that's where I think human overtake automation. You can have all the simulation possible, but only a human eye can correlate things in a creative way